Welcome back to the Frank Roche Show. Great to have you with me as always. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video, tell your friends and family, do the same. Appreciate the support. Today is May 4th, Saturday. That means yesterday was May 3rd, Friday. The first Friday of the month that isn't the first of the month. We get the employment situation report for the U.S. labor market, one of the most important data points released on the planet every month. The whole world pays attention to it. Check the health of the labor market for the largest economy on the planet. Total non-farm employment increased by 175,000 in April, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The U3 unemployment rate, the primary rate, the media published rate, was 3.9%, up 0.1% compared to March. The better rate to track, the U6 rate, includes discouraged workers, 7.4%. Probably the better measure to look at, a broader measure of unemployment. We have 6 different measures of unemployment. U3 is the main one. U6 is the best one. And we get 2 surveys from the employment situation report. We get the household survey, where we get unemployment rates, and we get the establishment survey, where we get number of jobs. And oftentimes these two do not match. The unemployment rate for April, 3.9%, and the number of unemployed at 6.5 million were changed little in April compared to March. Again, I prefer the U6 rate. Among the major worker groups, unemployment for adult men, 3.6%, increased in April. The rate for blacks, 5.6%, dropped small. And we had jobless rate for adult women, 3.5%, unchanged over the month. Teenagers, 11.7%, unchanged. Whites, 3.5%, unchanged. Asians, 2.8%, unchanged. And Hispanics, 4.8%, unchanged compared to March. The labor force participation rate held steady at 62.7%, and the employment population ratio was also unchanged at 60.2%. These have been pretty steady now for a couple of years, and relatively low levels, by the way. This headline number 175 was well below expectations and well below the prior period, which was March. In addition, as we've seen every month now for most of the Biden administration, the prior months were revised down. They put out a whopping headline number on the day of the release, and then a month later they revise it lower when no one's watching. President gets the kick for a good economy, and then no one notices it's not as good as we thought. In any event, the main sectors for job growth were again healthcare, social assistance, transportation and warehousing, retail trade, and not the best high quality jobs, not the best high paying jobs. Average hourly earnings for all employees increased 7 cents to $34.75. Year over year, average hourly earnings up 3.9%. The Fed's not going to like that. And as always, we have to look into the details of the data to find the true issues as to whether or not this is a good report or a bad report. And so we start with table A7, employment status of civilian population by nativity and sex. We look at the foreign-born population. Civilian labor force grew again from 30,912,000 to 31,726,000. The participation rate was 66%, well above that for native-born Americans, which was 61.7%. Total employed foreign-born workers in the United States rose from 29,962,000 to 30,482,000. Another 500,000 increase there. And that was compared to the number of employed for native-born Americans, 131,113,000 drops to 131,108,000. Again, more jobs go to the foreign-born. Now, one thing we always have to keep in mind when we think of the native population is, of course, we do have a large baby boomer population reaching retirement ages, and that could be a big piece of this discrepancy. But only one piece of discrepancy. We can see the employment population ratio for foreign-born workers, 63.4%, and the employment population ratio for civilians, native-born Americans, 59.6%. So again, another month where foreign-born workers win over native-born workers. And that's President Biden's immigration policy, of course. Another table we like to look at to check the health of the report, the quality of the report, is table A9, selected employment indicators. and we can find full or part-time status jobs. And what do we find? We find that once again, year over year, from April 23 to April 24, full-time jobs fell 535,000, while part-time workers, part-time jobs rose 1,050,000. Not good. We also see from this table, table A9, when we look at total multiple job holders, we see another increase from 7,676,000 to 8,349,000, an increase of 674,000. So no full-time job creation again. All part-time job creations, and more Americans are working multiple part-time jobs, or they're working a full-time job and additional part-time jobs. That's now 5.2% of the total employed. So on the surface, an okay number, consistent with a slow growth economy, 1.5%, 2%. But again, the quality of the jobs, who's getting the jobs, and the full and part-time nature of the jobs indicates that the labor market is weakening, continues to weaken. Now, the Fed must know this. They can see the same information I can see or you can see. You go to BLS.gov and look at these things for yourself. You do not have to take my word for it. You don't listen to the mainstream media. When we get information like this, go to the direct source. But the mainstream media will not bring you breakdowns like this, because the mainstream media is in the can for Joe Biden. They're going to pump up the support in any way they can, as is the case for any president, well, except for Donald Trump, because the media hate Donald Trump. People often ask me, why do you talk to us about data and the economy so much? Well, you don't have to be an economist or a banker or an investment banker or a financial guru or a business owner to be concerned about the performance of the U.S. economy. Every one of us, as citizens, as working individuals with homes and families and jobs, needs for transportation, we need to know the health of the economy. If you have a 401k or a pension plan, you have financial risk. If you have a loan, you have financial risk. If you own assets, you have financial risk. You need to know what the performance of the economy is on a regular basis. Now, you don't have to do the work. Let me, an economist, do the work for you. But it is relevant for everyone, the poorest amongst us to the richest amongst us. We all have financial risk out there. We all have interests in the performance of the U.S. economy when it comes to elections, and whether to vote Democrat or Republican or this guy or that woman. And so it's important to track the performance of the economy. I'll do it for you. I track about 34 important data points a month. We check on financial markets, of course, and we check on fiscal policy coming out of Washington, D.C., and monetary policy coming from the Fed. And so it's very important for you to do that. And if nothing else, let me do it for you. But just listen. Just watch. So you get the information you need to know what's going on with the economy around you. So on Thursday, as always, we get the initial unemployment claims data, number of Americans who lost their jobs and filed for unemployment insurance, 208,000 for the week ending to 27. And this number's become meaningless. We've had tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of layoffs over the past few years, and this number's been stuck in the low 200,000. This is the Fugazi data. Also, we had Q1 non-farm productivity up 0.3%, worse than expected, worse than the prior quarter. On Thursday, we also had the March international trade balance, goods and services, another massive deficit, minus 69.4 billion, imported more than we exported, as always. About as expected, about the same as it was in February. We're on pace for goods and services trade balance deficit to be about $900 billion in 2024. I prefer to look at the trade balance goods only, and that's going to have another trade deficit in 2024 about $1.1, $1.2 trillion. Try to wrap your head around that. $1 trillion trade deficit, $1 trillion budget deficits, $34 trillion in national debt, a Federal Reserve balance sheet of $8 trillion, household credit card debt over $1 trillion. We are in some serious medium to long run financial trouble as a nation. Also on Thursday, Q1 unit labor costs up 4.7%, higher than expected, higher than the prior quarter, not good. That's going to cause the Fed to rethink any cutting of rates in the June meeting. And again, I have the Fed on hold in June. I have the Fed maybe cutting interest rates one time in 2024. And then also on Thursday, we had March factory orders up 1.6%, as expected, a little higher than the prior month. Good number. This number is a little volatile. We look at the number X transportation, only up 0.5%. And then on Friday, as we've already talked about, we had the employment situation report out for the month of April, non-farm payrolls, average hourly earnings, average work week, the U3 unemployment rate, the U6 unemployment rate, and the report was weaker than expected. And then also on Friday, we had the ISM, the Institute for Supply Management Non-Manufacturing Index, the Purchasing Managers Index, 49.4 versus 52 expected versus 51.4 in March. And that's below 50, so contractionary. So some weak data here, finishing up the week of May 3rd. Not enough to push the Fed into easing in June for sure. And again, I think the Fed only goes once in terms of cutting rates in 2024. I want the Fed to stay on hold into 2025, no rate cuts. And in fact, I think we should go 25 basis points higher in the federal funds rate. All right, let's check in on markets real quickly. The equity markets rallied on the week. So we have this reverse situation now where bad news for the economy is good news for stocks. Everything is good news for stocks. I spoke to you the other day in my podcast about the Fed meeting on Wednesday, and now Jerome Powell gave another gift to the stock market when they decided to reduce their reduction of their fixed income bonds on a monthly basis, which meant they weren't going to be selling any bonds. Bond prices rallied, interest rates fell, stock markets took off. And then yesterday, Friday, the weaker than expected non-farm payroll report or the employment situation report gave them another boost. Bad news means the Fed's going to cut interest rates. It is perverse. The stock market's in a bubble. Don't put new money to work up here and sell these rallies. The Fed's main role today seems to be creating the wealth effect and maintaining a rising stock market. And it is bad news. It is very unfair in creating a major wealth gap in the United States. The Dow was up 450 points on Friday to 38,675. The S&P up 63 points. 5,127 was the close on Friday. Checking on the 10-year U.S. Treasury. Sadly, we reversed the good trend that was developing in the 10-year as we moved towards 5% yield on the 10-year. Now that's been reversed by the dovish Powell statement on Wednesday, the weaker than expected employment situation report on Friday, and we have the 10-year Treasury now closed the week at 4.50% when we were just about testing 5% in the past couple of weeks, which was the right direction. Opened the week at 4.59%, had a low on the week of 4.45% and closed at 4.50%. Check on oil, natural gas, both lower on the back of weaker economic data and relative calm in the Middle East. Check on WTI, West Texas Intermediate, the New York Mercantile Exchange. Opened the week at 79.25. Had a high in the week on Tuesday of 79.55, and the low for the week was the close on Friday at 77.99, call it 78. Natural gas also lower on the week to $2.15. Gold trading 2,310, up on the week. The gold market's telling us we still have an inflation problem. We still have lots of uncertainty out there. Buy gold as a hedge against uncertainty and inflation. Closed the week at 2,310. Check on the U.S. dollar index. Not surprisingly, the U.S. dollar index is off its recent highs as the Fed went dovish. Opened the week at 106, had a high in the week of 106.27, had a low on the week Thursday, Friday of 104.80 and closed at 105.08. Again, buy dips in the dollar. This is related to the dovish comment from Powell on Wednesday with respect to bond sales and the weaker than expected employment situation report on Friday. Always checking on snapshots of the markets to keep you in check. We want to see how markets react to the fundamental data for the performance of the U.S. economy. The equity market is driven solely by the macro perspective, which is Fed monetary policy and the belief they're going to lower rates, and the micro perspective with some better than expected earnings. We're getting better expected earnings from companies because their forecasts are low, and so they're beating their deliberately low forecasts to get the boost. All right, the other thing I want to bring to our attention today is some stuff about President Biden that just doesn't stop every day. There's something new. It's usually something undemocratic. It's usually something with an executive order, or it's some new regulation imposed by one of the dozens of departments, of course, that are part of the federal government with no role for the U.S. Congress. The regulatory scheme has been advancing sharply. I haven't done the count yet, but we're into the hundreds of new regulations since 2021 when President Biden took office. And many of these things are meaningful things that should be voted on by the US Congress. And President Biden's immigration policy remains unchecked. Republicans refuse to do anything about it. It's largely because Republicans probably support it, but don't want to admit it. When we think of immigration, we think of the agriculture sector, we think of the construction sector. These sectors are powerful sectors when it comes to elections in counties and states around the country. Farmers and contractors and landscapers want more and more cheap, easy to manage labor. And immigration's something we like in America. America has benefited from immigration. Immigration policy as practiced over the past 25, 30 years has not been beneficial to America. We have to stop illegal immigration, period. President Biden, of course, has just thrown open the gates. Millions, now almost, of people entering their country illegally. That's to say, outside a legal port of entry without a visa obtained in their home nation. What we need is the end of illegal immigration, and we need a well-managed legal immigration policy because America can benefit from immigration, as we have many times in the past. So we need 250, 300,000, maybe 500,000 legal immigrants a year. But that is not the case right now. And so it keeps going in terms of the Biden administration, keeps pushing on this immigration issue. The motivation seems to be driven by elections. And when you think about where President Biden is sending all these individuals, he's dispersing them around the country, oftentimes into red states. And one of the ways he's been doing this is something that's been kept secret, was only revealed to the media, American citizens, as a result of efforts to get documents from the Department of Homeland Security. And it's been revealed that President Biden has been secretly flying in hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants into the country and dispersing them around the country. This is something called a parole program. It's a mass parole program, and they're flying into Florida and other states. Migrants from Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, Venezuela, who obtain a U.S. sponsor. So someone here in the United States who will sponsor them is supposed to house them and take care of them. If they pass a background check and demonstrate that parole is warranted based on significant public benefit or urgent humanitarian reasons, are allowed to fly into U.S. ports of entry, where they receive work permits and authorization to remain in the country for 2 years. Who's going to enforce that? We have laws in the books that says criminals are not allowed into the country, period. The Department of Homeland Security has apparently processed more than 400,000 migrants via this mass parole program. These documents were obtained by the House Homeland Security Committee. And the documents reveal that there is approximately 1.6 million of these migrants waiting to fly into the U.S. And as the Department of Homeland Security notes in one of its documents, all individuals paroled into the U.S. are by definition inadmissible, including those paroled under the CHNV processes. Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mark Green, Republican Tennessee, said that these documents expose the egregious lengths Secretary Mayorkas will go to ensure inadmissible aliens reach every corner of the country, from Orlando to Atlanta, to Vegas to San Francisco. And he goes on to say that this parole program is an unlawful sleight of hand used to hide the worsening border crisis from American people. Implementing a program that allows otherwise inadmissible aliens to fly directly into the U.S. And so President Biden is just continuing to push in a way that no president has ever, increases in illegal immigration. And what's interesting is comments he made in 2015 related to this. Let's just take a quick listen.
An unrelenting stream of immigration, nonstop. Folks like me who were Caucasian of European descent, for the first time in 2017, will be in an absolute minority in the United States of America. Absolute minority. Fewer than 50% of the people in America from then and on will be white European stock. That's not a bad thing. That's a source of our strength.
White America is not the minority yet. So he said that in 2015. He was wrong about 2017, although that's clearly the case, right? This is demographics. So at this point, white America will be a minority, probably 2035, 2040, 2045, somewhere in there. Although if we keep current pace of immigration, that could come sooner. But he followed through on those comments. He was vice president then. And we can see that he's following through on those comments now that he's president with this unrelenting stream of illegal immigration across the southern and northern borders. And now, of course, as we know, flying people in as well. So this will be a big campaign issue, obviously. Again, though, I don't think Republicans are pushing back as hard as they might because they're probably on board this policy, given the constituents at the state and county level across the country. Just a couple more things for today's podcast. Back to President Biden and the protests, the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, anti-American protests that have gained strength on college campuses that look like they're being shut down now. The college year is coming to a close anyway. I would imagine Democrats don't want these protests raging for much longer, given the election coming up in 2024. But President Biden is trying to play both sides of the fence here, and we have some media hypocrisy here. He's pulling what is essentially the media coups Donald Trump of doing in Charlottesville, the very fine people misrepresentation of Trump's quotes during the protests in the first year of his administration. And President Biden has now done the same thing, praising the Palestinians and opposing the protests, trying to play both sides of the fence here. Remember, this is pure electoral politics. President Biden is trying to weigh the force of the Jewish vote in America against the Muslim and Arab vote in America. And he seems to be coming down on the side of the Muslim and Arab vote, largely because of the important states that are involved of Michigan and Wisconsin when it comes to the electoral map and where these populations are. No one in the mainstream media, the left-leaning media, has called out President Biden in a similar way they did President Trump, praising both sides of the battle here. So a little hypocrisy, I know. And then lastly, I'm a movie guy. I haven't been to the movies in a long time because movies are so bad these days. I'm so glad I grew up when I did, when we got to see great movies. Hollywood is on its ass in terms of creating good movies, entertaining movies, movies that don't have a political message or a cultural message. And that was Jerry Seinfeld's release of Unfrozen. It's on Netflix, came out yesterday. I've watched it already. I love Jerry Seinfeld. Fan of the show, the Seinfeld show. I've seen every episode multiple times, and it's hard to go by them when you're surfing on the TV. I'm a fan of all the things he's done. I love the Bee movie. I loved his movie that he did with Orny Adams, documentary style, about his return to stand-up after the Seinfeld series. I love his roles on Curb Your Enthusiasm. I love all his stand-up stuff. I'm a big fan of Jerry Seinfeld. He does great interviews. He's direct, honest. Did a great interview with Rich Eisen this past week. If you want to check it out on YouTube, the Rich Eisen Show with Jerry Seinfeld, really funny. But Unfrozen was horrible. Good Lord, Jerry, what were you thinking? It's not gold, Jerry. It's not gold. Banya. An amazing cast. Hugh Grant, Melissa McCarthy, Amy Schumer, Jim Gaffigan, Bill Burr as John F. Kennedy. Max Greenfield. Remember Max he played that idiot mortgage broker in The Big Short, which was a great role. Peter Dinklage played a silly role. Andy Daly, who I like, played a silly role as a Quake Roads guy. Christian Slater had this weird role as a milkman. Jack McBrayer. We had Thomas Lennon from Reno 911. Fred Armisen. It was an interesting cast, but not a good movie. The story was silly. The acting wasn't great. The jokes weren't that funny. It's based on a true story, the battle between Post and Kellogg's in the 1960s with respect to breakfast treats. And of course, there was a giant overlying message that the 1960s was a horrible decade for food and diets. We lived on sugary cereals and sugary treats. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I guess in the 80s. I guess I'm still growing up in the 2024s. But what's interesting to note, though, as a nation, as children, we were not fat. We were eating these sugary cereals and these sugary treats, and breakfast was a bowl of sugar. But we were active, and we were not fat. And today, of course, that's quite different. But there was a lot of mocking of the quality of the diets back then. Jerry's role was, kind of a product creator at Kellogg's. Jim Gaffigan as the head of Kellogg's was not that good. I think the best role was probably Bill Burr as JFK. But the premise, the connection point between Kellogg's Pop-Tarts in JFK was silly because there was the premise that Amy Schumer, as the head of Post, couldn't get sugar because Kellogg's had dominated the sugar market out of Puerto Rico. And so Amy Schumer had to go to Russia to get the Russians to give her company Post sugar from Cuba. And so there was this whole Bay of Pigs kind of thing, 1962 missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis kind of theme. They also leaned on the movie The Right Stuff as some of their themes. But I thought it was silly. I thought the story was not great. I thought Melissa McCarthy was not great. Yeah, disappointing to be sure. Not a fan. If we're using 5 stars, I give it 2 stars, only because there's interesting to see the different cast, and there were a couple decent moments. The nostalgia was fun to look at. This nostalgia described in the movie was fun to look at. They had 2 kids as the main drivers behind Post and Kellogg's actual treats, and the 2 kids were dumpster divers. That was very bizarre. So sorry, Jerry, you're going to get panned on this one. Again, I'm going to give it 2 out of 5. All right, that's all I have for you today. Always try to buy American.